I'm very passionate about the matter of family dynamics, and I'm using experiential information and research to shed light into the matter. And I'm very happy to share and learn from others.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi Eynern, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started with this episode. Here we try to know the people behind the brand, people who they are, where they are coming from. So would you want to tell me anything about maybe your background? Let's try to know you first.
So I'm a family member. We are running a family business now in the fifth generation. And Family Hippocampus is basically made of family members. And what we like to do is to do research in family dynamics and connect with the community far and foremost to understand our own lives, but also then obviously share it with others to get more input and more food for thought and conduct thought experiments. And what I have done to dig into the matter, I started basically with behavioral economics and then ventured into cognitive neuroscience and lately also dynamical complex systems theory and chaos theory to understand the relational patterns in social systems.
Now, today we are looking at storytelling in family business, of course. So I don't know if you want to give us a little background, the importance of storytelling in family business or businesses that are related to family.
So I think when it comes to families and family dynamics, we need to find a way to bring the family together. And stories are a profound method of doing that. I mean, we as human beings are social animals, and we are very susceptible to stories of any kind because we use stories to interpret the gaps. So we get some information, the information is not complete, so we create our own stories to fill the gaps. And these stories emerge from stories we hear from the outside and stories we have in ourselves, and we create the story. So that could be used to also bring a family together and connect the generations.
So someone might be asking, of what use is the value of story in maybe in businesses, in this case, in family businesses? I don't know if you want to look at that as maybe somebody might ask you, it can even be a child that tries to understand, asking you, what is the value of story in family businesses?
So it is. Stories are in general have time and time again shown that they are providing an anchor and create a shared concern. If you look into Iran, Persia, when the Arab conquest happened, the Shahnameh is the book of gods, which is a very, very strong anchor, cultural anchor for the Persians. Also, one reason why they still speak Farsi and not Arabic. The same holds place for smaller social systems like families. So you can really create a shared concern, an anchor that a family connects around and converges upon. And it also delivers you a frame which then can be used to interpret information that is coming out of the system or from outside into the system. So it really helps to create cohesion if it's done the right way. So it is a very important part to synchronize the family system and to have family cohesion around that story. But you need to create the story, which is a conscious process, and you need to have someone telling the story. And what we also know from research conducted by also one family, two family hippocampus members, i.e. Sasha Lund and Doris Sommervilla, together with Nadine Kammerlander and also Elizabeth Bagger. So they looked into who is the storyteller in the family, and funny enough, it is often the female, and it's the granny telling the story. But what I'm proposing here is not just simply having someone in the family telling a story, but having the family creating the story.
Creating a story, that is very important. I'll come to that just now. But before that, I want to understand, how did you, Dominik, get into family business? What prompted you into this line of study and your business as it were?
Well, because I'm a business family member, and I looked into the matter and looked into alternative ways of family governance, simply because in the old way is basically, right, okay, there's something like corporate governance, we can throw this at the family, and then we call it family governance, have rules and regulations, and that's it. And for some reasons it doesn't really work, because family constitutions are more likely disaster recovery plans rotting on the shelf, gathering dust. So everyone signs it, but no one owns it. So the question is, and rather than having a compliance culture, how can we create a commitment culture? How can we synchronize the family system in a way that actually the family constitution is then a result of that synchronization work rather than the other way around? I can tell you from my experience that our family constitution not necessarily has synchronized the family system. So, and that inefficiency I observed in my own family, and I know from other family members that this is the case. So, then I thought, what could be done differently? And then the whole thing with synchronization comes in, because the family system is not a machine that can be controlled. It is rather an organism that needs to be nudged and worked with. And so synchronization is great. So how do you do it? There are multiple ways of doing it through family engagement, but one very profound method could be storytelling.
All right. You see, in family businesses, there are a lot of people that have different challenges. Of course, because all families are not made the same way, and the businesses related to family are not also made the same way, the challenges are different. But you, in your family business, in your own family business, have you ever had any challenges that you have to deal with? Which, of course, at the end of the day, we are not talking of story as a way of tapping into the value now to resolve maybe some of those problems.
There are always challenges, and the problem is we often don't see these challenges, even though they are there. They are latent crisis. So the question is, how do you deal with them? And one of these challenges high on the agenda is obviously succession. And that is something that can be dealt with in a more lenient and more efficient way if the family system is synchronized. If it's not synchronized, it can be a quite rocky road, and it not only affects the family, but also the entire business system and the adjacent system. The whole ecosystem is actually affected by failed successions. So that's why I think it is paramount to do the homework and do the synchronization work.
All right. You did make mention of creating a story just now, and I find it very interesting. I don't know if you want to say anything about how to create story in family businesses, because this is very important for us today.
So as I said before, the family system is an organism, and we need to understand the organism. So we need to do some diagnostic work and start with a narrative fragment inventory. What is that? So every family member has bits and pieces of the family history, in particular when you go down the generations. And even those who hold these bits and pieces of information, some of the information is actually suppressed, either through social norm perception or because these narrative fragments don't gel well with the self-concept. So it is being suppressed and hidden in the subconscious. So these narrative fragments need to be teased out of each and every individual, which should be a coaching exercise, because we're also dealing here with some narrative fragments and emotional volatility that comes with it. And it is, but again, it's important to get also the suppressed bits and pieces onto the surface. Why? Because even if you don't see them, they still influence the whole system. So that's the start. Once you have the narrative fragments and have a bigger picture, a better picture of what's in the family, then the family needs to come together and form a coherent story, which is basically a systemic coaching exercise. Because as you can imagine, not everyone will agree on some narrative fragments other people hold. So once you have that, you need a gifted author who is basically then filling the gaps and turning the coherent story into an engaging storyline, which is full of emotion, which is gripping. And why is that? Because what you want to achieve is that the brain engages the default mode network, that part of the brain that is active when we are not task focused. When you sit on a train and reflect, you do this with a good book you have read. You are less likely to do this with a family constitution. So, and this is what we need to create here. We need to create this good book, which is actually then processed in a default mode network, because that engages and binds the family together. And it is for sure a story that should also include the hardship maybe the first generation went through building the business. So this also shows you it is not a book that is being put on the internet and used for marketing purposes. This is a wholly private book containing all the information of the family. And that is what can create that shared concern, that anchor a family can gather around and always has in mind when they go through the world and are exposed to societal inputs.
All right. In a more concrete sense, maybe looking at Europe, for example, because we are in Europe, you can look at a company like Fiat or Ferrari, talking of Italy, or BMW in Germany, for example. There are many other big companies in Europe, which of course you might look at them to, they are also big multinational, but sometimes they are also family businesses. And there are generation and generation of story behind it, and they have been narrating their story in a way that it can fit them perfectly, and it can also bind them, and it can also help them to survive in times of crisis. So I don't know if you want to share with me what are the dynamics of these family businesses that you might see in Europe, and tell me what you think is working for them in terms of their storytelling. Help me with that.
What is helping them with the storytelling is probably a cohesion, and the storytelling I am alluding to here, again, is not for the public eye, and is different from a family chronology. So rules and regulations are great, and you need those, but they are not as effective as storytelling, and you need the storytelling at the heart and the synchronization of the family at the heart, and then you have your rules and regulations. And the families you were talking about, they are definitely way more institutionalized as maybe the Mittelstand. However, again, I think it helps to a degree, but you still will have people who are highly frustrated, even in a very regulated setting. But the family is also very good at keeping these under the lid, especially in Germany. I don't know about Italy, but if they are problems within the family, it is not something that one would want to have in the papers. And this is understandable.
I'm trying to understand how story is actually used to bond the family together, and in this sense, family businesses. I don't know if you want to say anything about that. Maybe you have some example to share, or I just want to understand that because I think it's very important for us now.
Yeah, I think it is the attractor where the family system converges upon. But it requires that the family comes together and interprets, and is also happy to reinterpret that story from time to time, because narratives are transient, meaning they are lasting for a while and then it tails off. There's a very good book by Robert Schiller, Narrative Economics. So he's looking into how narratives create booms and busts. So the same is true for families. And then also you have the next generation coming online. They're creating their startup. They are being very successful with that. And they want to be part of the family story as well. So they need to be included. They need to be integrated. There's this nice saying in English, if you feel part of it, you put your heart in it. And then also we need to make sure that these stories evolve as a co-evolution with the business, with the family, with the ownership, because stories are also conducive to creating stalemate. Maybe best described by the words, this is always the way we've done it. So this is where a story basically creates a roadblock. So that's why you need to keep the story moving, and you need to keep interpret the story and engage the family. That creates the cohesion, and it will help to create this commitment culture I was alluding to earlier before. Because when you look at family constitutions, they're highly context dependent. And we know this from the law, right? So yeah, we did this law, this is from the 90s. Now we need to adapt the law, so because things have changed. So they need to be adapted to the new context. And within the family business world, it's basically the same thing. And if you have something in the family constitution that is, or a situation that is not covered by the family constitution, what now? It takes a lot of time to actually changes in the family constitution. If you are committed to the course, if you are committed to the family, you will be much more agile and stay together in these transition phases. Why? Well, because every family member is committed to a common cause called family story. And this is how you create this anchor. And that's the value of storytelling if it's done the right way. And with that, I mean, it is very important to keep it alive, to interpret the story. Otherwise, it also can actually hinder the evolution and makes families fragile when it becomes a roadblock.
Oh, right. Now, we're talking of the family business. We're talking of creating the story. We are talking of constitution. We are talking of the value. Are we actually here also talking of maybe fictional story or true life story? How much of it is true life story, and how much of it should maybe be romanticized, maybe for the purpose of keeping the family together? Help me with that.
So, first of all, factual as much as possible. But then the older the families get, the harder it is. So you need to fill the gaps. So I think the more factual, the better. And then what you mean with romanticizing, I think it's the dramatic element in the family or in the family story that should be highlighted. This is what I meant with create an emotional reaction while reading this story. So it's not about romanticizing, it's about having dramatic elements to also make the third generation understand money doesn't come out out of the ATM. It was hard work and a very painful process the forefathers went through, because that's the other reason why I think families often go down the drain after the third generation, because the third generation doesn't have any experience of what the first generation and second generation have gone through. So if that kind of emotion needs to be created by the story. And why is this so important? Because emotions arrange our memory. So what has high emotional content will define how fast we can recover and retrieve the memory from our brains.
The memory from our brain. And this is very important now. Because we actually live on the memories, no? It helps us to shape us. Because here is history. Is the experience of the past. We have not been there, but this is the experience of our fathers before our fathers. By learning these things, it helps us to sort of shape ourselves in the present and also in the kind of future that we are going ahead. But you did make mention of the fact before that most of this story, when I was making mention of BMW, Fiat, or maybe Ferrari, of course, looking at the car industries in Europe, that maybe some of this story might not actually be there in the public eyes. I don't know if I get you correctly. So this story that we are talking about, is it something that somebody from the outside can easily access, or is it only kept for the company as part of the company's secrecy and part of the family? Can you say anything about that and why it might be that case?
So the family story is only for the family. It has no place in the company. If that is something that should also be used for marketing, bits and pieces, yes, but obviously the emotional hardships and what have you, and all these critical points are not, in my mind, for the public eye. You would use that story, that family story, to create a version for the public eye. But I wanted to take up what you said earlier, because this is very important about stories that we inherit. Through transgenerational epigenetics, they have found that actually stories that we not even have lived through are being given to by our parents. So meaning parents make experiences that changes the gene expressions, and these changed gene expressions are then being transmitted to the next generation. So if the parent generation has post-traumatic stress syndrome, the next generation will be very will show a high susceptibility to stress. And that also happens in families. So the past generations are very important to understand, where it gets harder and harder. But that is one element that we come to see the light of the world with. And the other part is obviously when we grow up, what we observe, what our experiences are completely and entirely unmediated by the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of that part of the brain that allows us to think logically. And so our brain is being shaped by what we inherit in terms of stories, and the stories we then learn through our experience. And these are all things that are divisive for how we behave, how we interpret information. But the good thing is it is malleable, and storytelling is a way of changing the shape of the brain, of the wiring of the connections, right? So And that's why it's so important to have this storytelling and creating the narrative fragment inventory, because this is where all these stories come to life in a very aware matter. Because there's also the saying, what we are aware of, we can manage. What we're not aware of manages us. And this is the same for families. So it's a very important work to be done. And to clear everything out, which is a relief for each individual in the family, and then coming together through that cohesive story, which is very engaging, that keeps a family, that synchronizes a family, and keeps it synchronized. Once the family is also happy to do the work and do the interpretation.
I'm looking for a kind of a case study. Is there a company that you know of that maybe have used storytelling correctly, who maybe we can look up to and say, okay, this is a good example of a company that used storytelling the right way, in your view?
I don't know of any. So it would be interesting to use that narrative process and see what such a family would think of the process and how it impacts the system. So it would be an experiment.
So in essence, we don't have any case study like that we can share, right?
So I don't have any. I'm sure there are families that do a very good storytelling. There are families who are incredibly well organized. And it is maybe not the way I have described how they created their story. But there are families out there that do an incredible good job at keeping the family together.
Now, in terms of the story that we tell ourselves, are there maybe the good story that we should tell, and maybe some of them that we can avoid for the sake of the family business? Or should we just tell any type of story? I'm trying to understand your take on that.
I don't think it's any kind of story. And every story that we tell ourselves is an emergent property from stories from the outside and from the stories we carry. And the stories we carry is in our memory, and our memory is not a filing cabinet. It's basically we retrieve bits and pieces from the cortex, and while remembering already interpreting the past experience. And then we edit it, then we use it, and then we put it back into the memory, and the re-encoding again is subject to interpretation. So stories are changing all the time, but this is how we roll, and that's why the storytelling works for individuals and for social systems in families, but also in a wider social context.
Okay. I remember in the beginning, you did make mention of behavioral economics. No, this is one of the areas where you are an expert. I don't know if that can have any influence or any impact on storytelling in terms of family businesses.
Oh yes, of course. Why is that? Because in behavioral economics, there are over 150 biases that have been detected, which means 150 cases where human beings in experimental settings have evidenced that they are not making rational decisions. So, meaning we listen to many stories that actually using these biases that influence our decisions. So yeah, it's again from a different side, from a different angle, showing you that storytelling works better than any logical deduction of a decision. And by the way, when it comes to decisions, they have found that actually we make decisions about 350 milliseconds before we actually realize we made this decision. And what we do then is actually we engage in post-rationalization. And there are other studies that actually even show you that when it comes to conscious decision making and logical thinking, it's actually 95 to 99% that we're not logical, that we are not conscious of our decisions, because they are routine decisions. This is also why biases work, because we need shortcuts, right? So if we would calculate each and everything from scratch, imagine brushing your teeth and going out the door. Well, when you have to calculate everything from scratch, you wouldn't leave the door in the morning. So it is these fast decisions that we need to make. And it is also something for our survival, right? Because you have a situation, you can't spend hours thinking it through, you just make a decision fast. And this is where the biases come in. So behavioral economics has a lot to say about how the human being rolls. And it actually started in the 70s, where a couple of psychologists and behavioral economists thought the old model with the purely rational agent doesn't work. Let's find evidence that it is false. And since then, they still have a hard time, I think, but it is more mainstream than it was past in the days. It is the biases that make our decisions. It is what we can influence through the storytelling. And behavioral economics has done great basic research in that matter.
All right. Biases, family, storytelling, and businesses. Now, here is my curiosity. Is it possible that sometimes this storytelling can also be manipulated? And if it happens, how does it impact the family business?
Storytelling is a form of manipulation. I mean, that's just that. Look at yourself. You go, or you go into a shop, you find something, and you manipulate yourself into I need this or I don't need this. Or some gifted salesman comes and actually really sells it to you, and then you're convinced you need it. Storytelling is a form of manipulation. The question is, are you coherent with it? Is it congruent with you? And in families, I think if people understand a story that wants to manipulate me from the outside, that can be problematic, because people realize they're not congruent with it. So hence again, I think it is very paramount to use the story as a tool for the entire family. So everyone should have a word and everyone should be part of the story, which then in the end emerges, and feel part of the story that emerges, because then no one feels manipulated, but everyone feels part of being a creator of the story. So everyone has a higher ownership rate, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and it's actually very interesting too. I'm looking at a family now where you have a key player, and because a family also, it looks like it's a society itself. It looks like a plant that is that germinates from a seed. It grows and it dies. Naturally, it dies, but okay, there are new ones that grow up. So at a point, at every time, there are people that are very influential, very powerful in the family. And then this family, of course, now you have brother, sister, maybe extended family that are involved in it. Everybody is not laughing all the time. So I'm trying to understand how we are able to be just all the time if we have the possibility to manipulate this story. What is going to be the regulation so that some people are not taken advantage of? What is going to be the guarantee that some maybe very influential member of the family do not take advantage of other if they can manipulate the story that they tell?
I think it is paramount to have an impartial coach here, or a team of coaches if the family is larger, because that is a natural in social systems. You're completely right. If you have then the idea, let's create a story about the family, the patriarch or the matriarch will say, then it's a story about me. No, it's not. And that has to be coached, facilitated. I don't think it makes much sense if a family says, let's do this family story. So you need to have outsiders that actually can guide the family through that process.
So from your understanding, are there hidden danger that we should be aware of in terms of the storytelling in family businesses that maybe people should open their eyes to check very well?
Yeah, sure. I think, as I said, hidden agendas. Can I manipulate the story in a way that I look good? All that will happen. But these dynamics are to be picked up by the coach and facilitated. Because in the end, if you have a story about the patriarch or matriarch, it defeats the purpose. Because what we said in the beginning, it is very important that everyone feels part of it. And even the little guy needs to be heard and feel heard. Because what you have in families or in any social system, the little guy is not heard. If people don't feel heard, they flip over time. And that shocks the whole system. So it makes sense to include everyone. I'm not saying it is easy, but it can be facilitated, and it has to be facilitated because this will create the coherence. If you have, let's don't talk to Tom, and then have this the storybook. Well, then the effort is actually worthless. So it is highly important to include diversity, to include everyone, the little guy, the big guy, making the big guy understand he's no longer the big guy, but he also needs to give voice to the little guy, and then go through iterations. It's not a linear process either, right?
Yeah, it's not a linear process because we are talking about the human society, talking about human behavior. I like what you said before. The behavioral economies. It is very important, and somebody need to understand the behavior of the human being here if we are going to be able to tell a story that put people together. Because we're not just talking about family now, because we are talking about our heritage. How is it going to be equal? Then we're also talking about business. That is already two powerful things put together there. But I believe if it is done correctly, it is the most powerful thing that we can see. So I wanted to speak to the effect of family storytelling in family business and generational bond to keep the family together and the business at the same time.
So the generational connection is also something. What I see is, the next generation needs to learn, and the old generation doesn't. I think this creates a divide. So I think the old generation needs to learn as well. And if you come to think of it, what does storytelling do here? The older generation has experiential information and knows many stories of their forefathers. The next generation may not know of. So here is an excellent platform to connect the generations through storytelling. And this is what the third level of creating the story is good for, the coherent storytelling. This is where the old generation comes out with their old stories, and the new generation will hear and listen to the old stories. But obviously it requires a safe space for people to share, which a facilitator needs to create. But this is a great opportunity to connect the generations through storytelling.
All right. This is a great opportunity. A couple of weeks ago, I was interviewing another person Okay, is somebody that you know related to family business. So at the point we were talking about the fact that all across Europe there are a lot of businesses that are linked to family, which is of course it's a very good thing. You can talk of Italy. I don't know of Germany, but I want to believe that in Germany too there are a lot of family businesses. No, um, so of course with me the argument is important. Even in UK too, there are a lot of businesses that are linked to family. This generational wealth is something that is highly pronounced here in Europe. So I want you to tell me if you think or if you see a lot of family businesses tapping into this storytelling as a strategy to keep the bond.
I'm sure that many family businesses have a past to look at and do this. But again, far and foremost, it is about family chronology. It's not the same as a real family narrative, as we discussed, because a real family narrative is an engaging story that you like to reflect upon, that is emotionally triggering. A family chronology, by definition, is not that. Not, at least not to that degree, because it's about facts and a timeline really, and a history. It's not the same as a family story.
All right, maybe somebody will try to really get the clear distinction between the two now, between family chronology and family story. Family story. So, what would you say in that, and why would you maybe recommend a client to concentrate on one instead of the other?
The family story or family narrative is an emotionally engaging story of the family, where like a gripping novel. And family chronology is simple, or time steps and what happened. So it's rather a report, whereas the novel really engages the default mode network, engages the family on an emotional level, and also contains information, not purely factual, because there are some gaps in the story, and also in terms of how people felt. There's drama, there is engagement, there is fire in the story, not something you would share with the public. The family chronology you share with the public.
Okay, so which of them would you recommend for a client that you like? Okay, a client that is a kind of a family business that maybe you are working with, or maybe you know them, you want to recommend something good for them. Which of the two would you recommend for them, and
family
why?
narrative, definitely, because if you want to synchronize the family, a family chronology is not going to do that.
All right. In a more concrete sense, how can a family business leverage storytelling for their own growth?
So, as I said before, it is finding time for the interpretation and frequent reinterpretation of the family story, because yesterday we saw it this way, but actually today we see it that way. So that has to be reflected in the family, in the family narrative. So it's that reinterpretation, which also engages the family, right? And it also keeps the family story alive. As I said before, it is a transient nature of narratives, so we like to forget about the narratives. So we have to remind ourselves, what was the narrative? And the next one is that narratives also can be roadblocks. So we need to understand, what are these roadblocks, or is there a roadblock coming? Do we have to reinterpret and also add new family members to the story that write their own stories, because they are successful entrepreneurs or bankers or whatever it might be. But being part of the system is so important, and that creates the leverage for the storytelling. That creates the shared attractor, the shared concern. This creates the cohesion. It's not about, it's the creation process and then the curation process. It's not the book itself, if that makes sense.
Now, today, Dominic, you have a business that have to do with, I don't know, are you consulting for people? How do you help your client? Help us understand that.
So Family Campus is a research outfit. We do workshops and seminars where we can actually engage with families, and it's about education. This is what Family Hippocampus does as a non-profit organization. So people will make a donation to the vehicle, and we are happy to deliver these workshops.
Mm-hmm. So who do you target? I mean, who can benefit from the services that you render? Is there any type of family? Can you be more specific on your client?
Business families or legacy families who want to understand more about family dynamics, and it's about creating awareness in our mind. For example, succession is a big topic, obviously, and traditionally successions are being looked at by the lawyers and the tax advisors. But we focus on the behavioral side of successions. And for example, together with Octavio and Graf Belati, using the design thinking process. So, explaining that, engaging people, trying it out, doing the experiments in such a workshop is something very experiential, which people then can take and hopefully are inspired to think differently about the matter than they did before.
All right. So how can people connect with you? Maybe now they heard you talking, they want to get to know you better, they want to connect with you. How can they do that? Use a few seconds to promote yourself.
So we've got a website, which is family-hippocampus.com. And also very happy to receive emails on dve@family-hippocampus.com. And then we can take it from there. On the website, you also will find a couple of articles that we have written pertaining to the matter of family dynamics and who can benefit from what we do. I think, in the end, it is the family world we want to engage with and want to help.
All right. When you say in the family world, are you working only with the people in the UK or some other part? Can you say specific on that?
Actually, everywhere in the world, as long as we can speak English or German, I say.
All right, that's good. So now, what would be your recommendation for people that are into family businesses on how to better tap into storytelling for their own business and their own family, of course, because both of them are linked together?
How to tap into storytelling? I guess it is starting a conversation about the matter. And then we are very happy to have a conversation and also find the right partners in all languages who can maybe help creating such a story.
All right. I've asked you everything. Is there another thing you would like to say to conclude the conversation? Maybe something you wanted to say I didn't ask you?
So from my side, I think it is so important to help family businesses and to succeed and make families aware what power they have with the family effect, meaning how the family system influences the business system, and the whole social, emotional, and financial wealth is greatly underestimated. And we are here to create this awareness and help people to think differently about it. And we are also very eager learning from other people's experience so that we can actually create more content for the community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Eynern. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you in the next episode.